Cyril Ramaphosa has received part 1 of the much-anticipated state capture inquiry's report. It comes after over 3 years of hearings, a series of extensions, and almost 1 billion rand spent in funding the process. The Commission's chairperson, who's currently the acting Chief Justice, that's Raymond Zondo, handed over the document, which deals with 3 companies in the last hour: South African Airways and its subsidiaries, the Gupta-owned New Age newspaper, as well as the South African Revenue Service, all feature in this first volume.
Volume 1 deals with South African Airways and its associated companies, namely SAAT and SA Express. Volume 2 deals with the New Age, the advertisements and breakfast shows, briefings that used to happen, where various SOEs and government departments entered into contracts with the Gupta company that owned the New Age. That is Volume 2. Volume 3 deals with SARS, South African Revenue Service, as well as the topic of public procurement in South Africa.
Well, President Cyril Ramaphosa has thanked Acting Chief Justice Zondo, his team, as well as whistleblowers who took part in the inquiry process. Now, on the list of other people who received thanks was the former Public Protector, Thuli Madonsela, who put together that report that led us to this point.
And I wish to thank the many people who gave evidence before the Commission itself, and to the academics, the investigators, the journalists, whose work contributed to uncovering many of the matters that have been dealt with by the Commission. It is important also to recognize the contribution of former Public Protector, Advocate and Professor Thuli Madonsela, whose initial investigation into allegations of state capture laid the foundation for the establishment of this Commission of Inquiry. Lastly, I wish to acknowledge and commend the actions of the people of our country, South Africans, who shared determination to end corruption and to demand clean governance enabled the establishment and the work of the Commission.
Let's talk more about this then. We're joined by Lawson Naidoo for the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution, where he's Executive Secretary. Lawson, always good to speak to you. So the President, at the start of his remarks tonight, said that this is a defining moment in ending the era of state capture and restoring credibility of this country's government. Is it really?
Well, that's yet to be seen, Thembekile, because it will only be mark the start of the end of this culture of impunity, corruption and state capture if the recommendations that are contained in the report are going to be implemented and implemented swiftly. Because, you know, we've heard from the more than 300 witnesses that have appeared before the Acting Chief Justice Zondo, the depth and extent of state capture and corruption, and the way institutions of state were manipulated for nefarious ends. So it does indeed have to stop, but that's going to largely rely on the political will to implement whatever measures that the Justice Zondo may recommend in his report. So that's obviously what we're all going to be looking out for critically. And in order to end the culture of impunity, those people who've been implicated and against whom, on weighing the evidence, as Zondo believes, need to be further investigated or prosecuted, that those prosecutions and investigations do indeed take place.
There's also what the President has opted, well, the Presidency has opted to do with the processing of this report. It's now been officially handed over to him. It'll be published on the Presidency's website, where we will all be able to access it should we wish to read it. And that is an interesting choice, isn't it? That instead of government going behind the scenes to study the report first before releasing it, we can now all go through it in real time. Is it the best way to deal with it, especially given the questions that had already been raised by the likes of Democracy in Action about the president's suitability to be the one to receive it?
Well, I mean, I think given that a large part of the process of the State Capture Commission has been conducted in public, we've been watching the hearings intently. So it's it makes absolute sense for the report to be made publicly available as soon as it is received by the president, as you say, so that we can all engage with the report and see how the acting Chief Justice has weighed up the evidence before him, what considerations he took into account when coming to his findings and his recommendations in that regard. So I think the fact that this report has been made publicly available is to be welcomed. With regards to the application brought by the Democracy in Action, I think the issue here is, there's an assumption that because the president gave evidence or testified before the Commission of Inquiry, that he will necessarily be implicated or that there may be findings against him in the report. And I'm sure that Justice Zondo, if that were to be the case, that if he makes any adverse findings against the president, he will recommend a manner of dealing with that aspect of the report, which will probably have to include Parliament, because as we know, the president is constitutionally accountable to the National Assembly. So I don't think there's any cause for concern in that regard at this point in time. Obviously, if there are going to be findings made against the president, then how the report is dealt with in that regard will come to the fore.
Let me speak to you then, Lawson, about the issue of waiting until all three parts of this report are in before government, at least at presidential level, speaks in detail on the findings and the recommendations. Why would it maybe less sensible, shall I put it that way, to perhaps deal with issues as they come up with each report?
Well, I mean, I think what the president has asked for is some additional time after he receives the final part of the report at the end of February. He asked for and was granted a period of 4 months to June this year before he formally presents his response to the report with an implementation plan to Parliament. But, now that the report will be in the public domain very shortly, there are certain aspects of the report that are what I might call immediately implementable. So if there are recommendations for further investigations or even for prosecutions, that can happen without having to wait for government to apply its mind to those issues, because they have no role to play in that regard. So I think we need to look at the different aspects of the report, the different kinds of recommendations that are made, because what will require President, Cabinet and Parliament to apply its mind to would be legislative and or constitutional changes that may be recommended by the acting Chief Justice.
And on the acting Chief Justice, whatever the findings, recommendations, and whatever comes from this report will have quite significant impact, won't it, on the rest of his career? How much is riding on this for Justice Zondo?
Well, it's coincidental, I would say, that he releases this report at the time when he's one of the 4 candidates for the position of Chief Justice. We know that those interviews are due to be held by the Judicial Service Commission early next month. But, one hopes that the JSC will evaluate each of the candidates on their competencies for the job, their track record in judicial office, and their suitability to hold the position of Chief Justice. And, of course, this now forms part of Raymond Zondo's CV, as it were. So it's something that will be considered, but I don't think it would necessarily be a decisive factor.
It had, the inquiry, been criticized in the past for being lethargic in parts, sometimes broadening its scope in terms of the issues it was dealing with and spending too much time on certain issues than some feel it should have. Where are you critical of the inquiry's processes over the 3 years of oral evidence?
Well, I think those criticisms that you've raised are valid, that the Commission could have conducted its work in a much more efficient manner. It could, for example, have dealt with issues on a thematic basis and dealt with, for example, issues related to Transnet, SAA and ESCOM to their conclusion, and then produced interim reports on the basis of those issues. It failed to do so, and we're now left scrambling at the end to put together the 3 reports. We were told in an affidavit that the Justice Zondo filed in the High Court last month, or just a couple of weeks ago, that part 1 of the report would include Transnet, and that doesn't appear to be the case anymore. So it seems that things are still chopping and changing. So I think the Commission could certainly have conducted its work in a more efficient manner. It should not have been sidetracked into dealing with issues that were not central to its mandate. And in this regard, I would say that where the Commission went wrong was not to prioritize the issues that emanated from Thuli Madonsela's State of Capture report, and to start by focusing on those issues and then to deal with the broader issues that were raised when the terms of reference were developed, which became much wider than that State Capture report. So I think there are various ways that this could have been done which would be more efficient and perhaps have saved us a considerable amount of money in the process.
Lawson Naidoo, always good to speak to you. Lawson is Executive Secretary of the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution, just reacting tonight to the official handover of the State Capture Commission of Inquiry's first report to the Presidency. Just to remind you, if you're just joining us, you will be able to read that report yourself. It'll be published on the Presidency's website, according to the President, within a matter of hours. So tonight still we expect, or latest tomorrow morning. Well,